Friends, in just a few moments, we are going to begin the funeral services for Michael Lilienheim. If you have a cell phone or a pager, I would ask for you to please take a moment and turn it off or place it in the silent mode so as not to interrupt the funeral ceremony. And officiating today's services will be Rabbi Brandt Rosen. Again, in just a moment we'll begin, but do take a moment to make sure those cell phones are off. Thank you.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam dayan ha'emet. Blessed are you, eternal our God, sovereign of all worlds, who is righteous judge. Nivarech et ma'ayan ade'ad mifakeh, ma'agal ha'chayim hamamit u'mechayeh. Let us bless the well, eternally giving, the circle of life, ever dying, ever living. We have come together today as family, as community, to give voice to our sacred sorrow. We have come together to draw strength from one another and from the ultimate source of all strength. We have come together to affirm comfort and blessing, even in the face of deepest loss. We have come together to bid farewell to Michael Lilienheim. We share a common prayer that the source of healing sustain those who grieve. May those who have been wounded with loss be blessed with love and compassion. We pray that the journey that lays ahead lead from darkness to light, as it is written. Thus says the source of hope, I will respond to your yearning. When you call out to me in the night, I will answer. I will be with you even in the darkest of places. I will give you strength. I will nourish you, and you shall know protection beneath the shelter of my wings. Baruch ma'avir afela umevi ora. Blessed is the one who removes darkness and brings light. B'nomar, and we say, Amen. Let's turn in our booklets to the 23rd Psalm. I'll read it first in Hebrew, and then we'll read it together in the English translation. Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binot desha yarbitzeni, almei menuchot yenachaleni. Nafshi yishovev yancheni v'magle tzedek lama'an shemo. Gam ki elech begei tzal mavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Shivtecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni. Ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged zorerai, dishanta vashemen roshi kosi revaya. Ach tov vachesed yirdefuni kol yemei chayai, vishavti beveit Adonai leorech yamim. Let's say together. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. From Kohelet, the biblical book of Ecclesiastes, we learn, Dor holech v'dor ba v'ha'aretz le'olam omadet, v'zarach hashemesh, shuvah hashemesh, ve'el mekomo sho'ef zoreach husham. Holech el darom, sovev el tzafon, sovev, sovev, holech haruach, v'al svivotav shov haruach. Kol hanechalim hochim el hayam, v'hayam einenu maleh. El mekom she'hanechalim hochim, Sham hem shovim lalachet. A generation goes, a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, the sun sets, and glides back to where it rises again. Southward turning, blowing northward, ever turning blows the wind. On its rounds, the wind returns. All streams flow into the sea, but the sea is never full. To the place from which they flow, there they will flow back again. Finally, this poetic rendering of Psalm 39. Unnameable, unthinkable God, Lord of the dead and the living, teach us how transient we are and how fragile is everything we love. For all of us flash into being as insubstantial as breath. Our lives are a fleeting shadow, then we vanish into the night. And now, Lord, what do I wait for? My only trust is in you. Help me to give up my desires and to let go of who I am. You have granted me this brief existence, which is almost nothing in your sight. May I receive it gratefully and gratefully give it back. Turn toward me, touch my spirit, stay beside me until the moment when I must step out into your final embrace. According to Jewish tradition, when we refer to people who have passed away, who have died, we traditionally follow their name with the word zichrono or zichrona livracha. May their memory be for a blessing. And that is not only a custom, it's really, as I see it, a spiritual imperative to us. The lives we live are a blessing, truly. And the lives we live are a kind of story, sacred story, whether we realize it or not. You know, every day perhaps is another page, and every year another chapter. And we're so often so involved in the writing of the story, we are not able to really see how all the pieces fit together. And it really falls to those who come after us to tell our story. That is the way we make one another's lives for a blessing, by honoring the stories of our lives. And these are sacred stories that each and every one of us are writing. You know, storytelling is considered a sacred enterprise by just about every religious tradition. And perhaps the most sacred of stories in our world are the stories of loved ones, people who we loved who are no longer with us physically, but live on through the telling and the retelling. And so for Mike, that process begins today. The remembrance of who he was, the remembrance of our roles in that story, and how that story was both uniquely his, but also told in different ways by different people who were part of his life. And it will be a sacred imperative for us to continue to tell Mike's story from here on in, so that, in a sense, it will never be over, as long as there are those who are able to remember him and to bear witness to all that was good and true and enduring about his life. So it is truly our honor to be able to hear some of these stories told to us today as we say goodbye to Mike. And it is our hope that through this telling, it will conjure up memories of your own thoughts and anecdotes and stories that are truly sacred in their own right. Our first speaker is his sister Irene, who unfortunately is not able to be with us here physically in the room, but I do believe through the magic of technology will be able to join us. All right, so.
I'm very sorry not to be able to be there with you. I got food poisoning last night of all nights, and I've been feeling pretty sorry for myself until I realized that I was lucky that I was able to be with Michael when he was alive all the times that he needed me most. And so that's brought me a lot of comfort. I used to babysit for Mike on Saturday afternoons. We take off. him in his stroller, me pushing, and go down to the beach a few blocks from our house in Glencoe. He was a very cute kid in perpetual motion, a limitless torrent of energy. Later, he ripped ahead on his tricycle or tumbled around in the backyard with his friends. The energy never subsided. Many years later, Abby, Tobin, and I would come to visit from Montreal, and we'd go to the lake for a picnic, or I would drive there with him to watch the waves and boats on Lake Michigan. It was much calmer and just as lovely in a different way. I wish we could do that together now. Our parents were exceptional people, survivors, both heroes who saved lives in the war. My mother dared to take off her yellow star to sneak out of the Warsaw Ghetto and bring back a doctor to set my father's broken leg. My father risked his life to get Prontosil for his friend who lay dying, then almost died himself in the effort. They were strong in body and spirit and bigger than life. Our parents raised a beautiful boy who was strong in body and spirit too. Christina, a nurse practitioner, said he was one of the strongest individuals she'd ever treated. Joe said he thought Michael's sheer will and personality alone would have had him live forever. There was a lot of joy in my family. We were all full of life. Although we didn't have Michael's energy, it was a family in perpetual motion. I chose to show that in our photos and our films, but there was suffering too. A few years ago, I went to a lecture about children of survivors. I expected to hear about all the things that were wrong with me. The professor said that children of survivors were the most studied group worldwide ever. And that what the study showed is that children of survivors, like the survivors themselves, were extraordinarily resilient. My parents passed on not only their strength, but also their resilience to Michael. Mike was on the brink of death so many times and pulled through each time. He was often afraid of dying, but bounced back with just a word from Abby or Josh or me that he was going to be okay. And then he'd get back to the things that he loved, watching the Bulls, Blackhawks or Cubs, reading philosophy, eating Illuminati's pizza or Polish sausage from Herm's Palace, which later, when he was ill, I'd have delivered to him on the weekend. I put it in my will that these weekend deliveries would continue after I died. Tanya described Mike as a wonderful conversationalist with a joyful sense of play and excitement for so many things. Anthony described him as caring and fun-loving. And when Kevin posted on their Central School website, he got a note from Jeff that Mike was the nicest person he ever knew at school. All his friends said how important he was in their lives. When he was younger, his friends would come over to play in the backyard and offer to sleep over, and my mother would have them all topple into the Chrysler and drive them to the game, waiting patiently for them to get autographs afterwards. Mike had more than a good eye for talent. He discovered Tom Hanks and Daniel Day-Lewis in the first roles and told me that they were great talents to watch. He loved Tom Waits and Bruce Springsteen and classical music. Josh bought him a radio, or several actually, and he would listen to Mozart, Chopin, Elgar, Mahler, and Bach, or Jerry Rafferty, The Doors, and David Draymond. A trained cantor turned metal, as Jim let me know. Mike and Abby were close friends. They went for long bike rides along the Skokie Lagoons and shot baskets every day in the summer when we visited Glencoe, and played baseball when Mike lived with us in Montreal. Mike was an exceptional athlete with great hands, as Abby always said. With his talent and his will to win, he might have been a professional athlete if he had had the chance. And he possessed a remarkable near photographic memory, recalling in details games and plays going back over 50 years. Josh would visit him every week, and used to take him to the library in Highland Park. Mike was a vociferous reader, especially of philosophy: Kant, Descartes, Schopenhauer, Russell, Nietzsche, Buddha, and also, as Jim told me, of world history, like the Durand volumes, which belonged to our father. Later, during the pandemic, when his sight became bad in one eye, we would speak for an hour each day on the phone, and I would read his favorite philosophers. And then he and Abby would discuss the latest games or argue over the Blackhawks versus the Habs. Mike loved animals, and he always had dogs: Butch, Relish, Norton. When our son Tobin was born, it was a new era of perpetual motion. And the one who kept up with Tobin best was Uncle Mike. They loved each other and shared a love of Norton, Mike's dog. My favorite pictures of Mike are a series of Tobin and him playing with dinosaurs, especially the one with them holding them up in the air, about to attack, and then hugging each other after. Well, it turns out that was Mike's nephew's favorite one too, that dinosaur picture. Yesterday, when he flew in from Montreal, he was wearing a beautiful pendant that he had just made with that picture in a heart surrounded by Mike's birthstones. If you find him later, he can show it to you. Michael died at the end of 5 miraculous days. Tobin came to Chicago with us, and they spent a wonderful afternoon full of tenderness and love. Then his dear friend Jim came the next day. I'd like to read something that Jim wrote. It was a day I'll never forget and a blessing, albeit a painful mixed one. In the short time I was with him, I saw in Mike's face the full gamut of the vicissitudes of inner life: anger, bitterness, blame, curiosity, fear, forgiveness, gratitude, happiness, hope or lack, impatience, levity, loneliness, love, regret, resignation, sadness, tranquility, uncertainty, and wisdom. I saw the face of a child and the face of a sage, a wise senex. Some people don't live that much in a lifetime. He says more and then ends with, we are not one momentary thing, but our being subsumes all that we are and all that we will be. To live this way can be fearsome, painful, and even dangerous. It moved me to see that Mike dares to live thus, and to know that I have a kindred spirit and friend. There was so much more, he says, I wish I could have said and heard from Mike. Maybe Mike knew that his time was short, but somehow he managed to say what was important. The next day, Anthony, one of his closest friends growing up, came, and they lived memories together that they shared in their childhood. And then Abby and I had him to ourselves another afternoon, and Josh, who has been with him for over 30 years and always called him part of the family, was the last to see him. My parents raised a beautiful boy who had a charmed childhood and then was struck with mental illness. My mother made sure he had a network of love and support, and my father guaranteed he would always have what he needed to take care of himself well. I am grateful for a lifetime with my brother and for those blessed last few days. And I will miss his daily calls, his smile when he saw me, and how he said my name. We all love you, Mike. I love you.
So glad Irene was able to share her thoughts with us. And we're going to hear from a number of others now. Next, I'd like to invite up Mike's cousin, Jules.
I am exceptionally honored by Irene's request to say a few words about Michael. Is this loud enough? Or? All righty. I'll have to figure out how to do that. Like many I've never had a problem hacking loud as a microphone. That's like many in this room. Irene and Mike are children of survivors. Irene and Mike grew up without much family, as so many perished in the Shoah. Family is who they adopted. You're the family that was adopted. When Irene married Abby, she had instant family, and I was lucky enough to be counted as part of that family. At various times in my life, I lived with Abby and Irene. There's stories. You can speak to me later. Not everyone can have a JD as a valet, but Abby and Irene did. I got to live with them and help them and as they started their film career. I met Lydia, Henry, and Michael after Abby and Irene started to spend time together. I visited Chicago, and Michael would visit Montreal. I was very lucky to call the Lilienheim clan my family. I had a lens into a loving, caring family who had created an extended family, all of them chosen. It's really cool in a way. Huge loss led to that choosing, but still they were able to choose. While he was in university and at the time before his mental challenges had truly come to the fore, he spent some time in Montreal. He loved Montreal smoked meat. He loved a few brews. He loved going to baseball games, but not the Montreal Canadiens. Something he did not love. Montreal Canadiens, for those of you who follow hockey, is an original six franchise, just like the Blackhawks. Loyal to a fault, Michael was not prepared to entertain a change in colors. In 2020, after a 49-year wait, the Blackhawks won the Stanley Cup, and Michael was elated. I remember him teasing me. I spoke with him, and he would love to talk to me about this victory. Now, the Habs have 24 Stanley Cups, but just as an aside. But Michael was elated. Like all things in Chicagoland, resiliency and perseverance paid off. Michael was and continued to be an ardent fan of all Chicago sports teams. He had an encyclopedic knowledge of the history of each of his teams. He truly understood statistics and understood the failings of players and why players were great. Michael was frustrated by the curse. Thank God, Michael got to witness the end of the curse with the 2016 World Series win against Cleveland. A 108-year curse was lifted. Michael also got to witness the many attempts to get rid of the curse. Two of my favorites. When Cub fans at a wild card game in Houston at the Astrodome tried to bring a goat onto the field, they were stopped. But interestingly enough, the Cubs won the wild card game, however, did not go to the World Series that year. Also, the peculiar Chicago process of hanging parts of goats on Harry Caray's statue. That also proved fruitless until the Cubs finally won. We were talking a moment ago about Michael's passion for statistics and how knowledgeable he was about sports. He delighted in the Bulls' 6 championships between 1991 and 1993, and then again between 1996 and 1998. I wore this baseball tie for this occasion. After the Shiva tomorrow, I'll be going to St. Petersburg. I am a Major League Baseball Player Association salary arbitrator, and I know that Michael delighted in my role, and if he was here today, we'd be talking baseball. And I would really, really love that. I have to mention the Bears. The Bears. January 1986, no more need be said, although hope springs eternal. And in Chicagoland, perseverance is everything. In Mike's lifetime, all the teams he loved won at least one championship. They, like Mike, had this quest to persevere. These teams, except the Bulls, had to fight for everything they eventually received. Like Mike, they were scrappy, undaunted, and continue to this day to persevere. Mike had left a hole in the hearts of everyone in this room. He was very bright, intelligent, proud, and was prepared to fight his mental health challenges head on. Finding a cure for schizophrenia is the long-term project of many in this room, in fact, mental health generally. Through donation and through working with individuals with mental health challenges and medical innovation, the quest for a cure requires perseverance. Michael lived his life the best he could, and now he's no longer with us, but he'll be remembered by all of us for his desire to live the best life that he could. Throughout it, he persevered.
Thank you, Jules. We'll hear next from his dear friend, Josh.
Hello, I'm Josh Mark. I was Mike's social worker all these years, but that relationship was much more than that. He really was my friend and kind of my brother. First, I just wanted to direct some words for Irene. Mike was so fortunate to have such a caring and smart sister, who also somehow had the stamina for the incredible commitment it took to be Mike's sister. Irene, your constant support for me was always there as I tried to support Mike. We were partners in helping Mike through many tough times. And Abby, you supported Irene. And also there was this constant connection that you kept going between you and Mike. It's been a privilege to know you, Irene and Abby, and to be connected to your family. Being with Mike and being there for Mike over these years has often been difficult and at times incredibly difficult. But I am enhanced by knowing Mike so intimately. He was a remarkable man and had to contend with an overpowering mental illness. But he taught me a lot, and he taught me a lot about myself. He was my client, my friend, and as I said, kind of my brother. And I cared about him, and he cared about me. I wanted to share some of the stories that kind of on Michael's journey through all these places he lived, for things that happened, and these really fine moments I was able to witness, and times I was able to be with Mike that were quite special. But this is an important story to tell because a lot of people who deal with mental illness, they're kind of invisible. Their stories really aren't told. It's one of the reasons I so appreciated the film that Irene and Abby made, Unquiet Minds, about people dealing with mental illness talking and sharing, and the viewers getting a glimpse inside lives that are often sidetracked and not visible. I first met Lydia and Henry at a parent support group I ran. I loved the parent support group. I was a social worker at a mental health center, and I really looked forward to the parents support group. And this was a group where all the participants were parents of adults with mental illness. And they just sort of created a special connection, a community, and they understood each other, and they were able to support each other in a truly empathic way. But this group led to great things. First of all, Lydia and Henry enchanted everyone. They were just remarkable people, and they emanated a certain energy, and if anyone knew their story, it just seemed all the more remarkable. One day, after the group, Lydia came to me and said, "Mr. Mark, there's big problems with Mike. Will you reach out to him?" And that's the way things worked on this team I was with. We were about going to people's homes, meeting them wherever they were, and trying to help them move forward in doing better and dealing with their mental illness. But Mike wouldn't have me. So we spent around 9 months talking on the phone. And it was great. He was, when Mike was comfortable and at ease, he was just a fantastic, friendly, wise, incredibly smart person. And how you referred to Mike or Jules, he was sort of like a sports encyclopedia. It was just incredible. Eventually, I could visit him at the home on Fairview Road. Mike hung out in the sunroom. He had his blanket, TV, radio, snack food, cigarettes, and Norton, the dog. And it was it was quite a comfy little nest he made for himself there. Finally, Mike agreed to come to my office, and lo and behold, he drove himself, and he was a very good driver. It was like, besides sports and later philosophy, it was kind of a zone of functioning that seemed to be unaffected by the mental illness. It was really remarkable. And as we drove around later to places, I felt fine being a passenger with Mike. But he made it to the office. I worked with him individually, but soon we started the men's therapy group. So Mike, as usual, I had to push him to do everything. It took a real long time. He did join the men's therapy group, but the men's therapy group was very stale. Everything seemed to run through me. There was no group dynamics. There was hardly any talking amongst the members. Until Mike one day said, "I want to bring my friend Norton to the group." And one of the guys said, "Well, who's Norton?" "He's my dog. He's so cute, Nortouche." And Norton came to the group, and the group was transformed. Norton was going up and sniffing and jumping on everyone, and everyone was petting Norton. And it was like the group came alive. There was all this interaction. Everyone was talking, laughing, and we became so loud that the secretary would occasionally knock on our door like, "Quiet down, guys." But little did I know that I had a co-therapist who wasn't a human being. From the parent support group came a core group of parents who really wanted to have respectful, solid housing options for their adult children. And amazingly enough, they formed an organization and did just that. And Lydia and Henry were a key part of this. There were 3 group homes, there was a day program, And again, it's in the film Unquiet Minds. It was an amazing achievement. So Mike moved into Wilmette House, and things were good in a way. He wasn't the best roommate and housemate. He didn't love to cook or clean or contribute. And I often had to run a lot of interference for Mike. But things sustained. I would visit there. We'd shoot baskets in the backyard, but he wouldn't go for a walk with me. I was always pushing for that. There was just too much worry. Mike had a terrible, persistent delusion about harm that would come to him. During this time, the daily phone calls began, and I know Abby and Irene received many. Michael would call for reassurance, and for many years I handled these quite poorly because I really tried to maintain this role as a therapist and question why he was so worried and what evidence there was for the worry, and it never really worked. I was unable to soothe him or help him until I finally got it through my thick head to just respond to him like a human being. And I began this kind of way of talking where I would talk in a very soothing voice, kind of rhythmic, and say, "No, Mike, you'll be just fine." "How do you know that?" "I just know. You'll be fine." "Okay, see you tomorrow." And this was a great discovery for me. Once, years later, a colleague of mine from Denmark, Peter Nevers, said to me when I was telling him this story, he said, "Well, what do you prefer, Josh? Professional distance or professional closeness?" And professional closeness. I'll go a little faster through the rest of this, but sadly and amazingly, at Willpower, the agency that was running the program day to day decided to change the mission of the agency to one where people had to be progressing towards independent living and needed to be making steps towards that, of which Michael really didn't qualify. As Lydia was on her deathbed, Michael was kicked out of Willpower. It was a terrible time, and Irene fought incredibly hard to try to preserve Mike's placement, to no avail. He was sent to something called an intermediate care facility in Highland Park. I was quite upset about this, and indeed there was a difficult adjustment, and Mike was quite aggressive and difficult, and I was worried he was going to be kicked out of there. Around a week into being there, I remember this moment where the director, who was this very kind of stern, by the rules kind of guy, came into the room and said, "Mike, I have some sad news. Sit down." And Mike sat on the bed, and I sat on the bed with him, and he said, "Your mother has just passed away at Highland Park Hospital." And it was just one of those poignant moments, and just a very human-to-human moment. As it turned out, Abbott House turned out to be just a fine place for Mike. There was a really great sense of community with the people there, and Mike would smoke on the porch. It was a beautiful setting. And as Irene alluded to, Mike got interested in philosophy. He wouldn't go to the library with me for around 2 years, but he finally did, and he would just make a beeline for the 100s in the Dewey Decimal System for the philosophy books. Those were some good times, looking back. Then it was over. One day I got a call, Mike punched someone because they were looking at him funny. And he was discharged and sent to the hospital and then to a place called Albany House in Evanston. This was not a choice setting. It was a very large kind of warehouse for mentally ill people. There was 400 people in the building. There was 4 to 6 men in each bedroom. It was chaotic and loud and grimy. And I was pretty disappointed that Mike was there. Mike didn't complain about it. And we continued to have our weekly meetings. We continued to go out to many meals at local restaurants. The special place we went was called the Lucky Platter, where Mike would order a huge breakfast. And then after we were done, he would order a chocolate cake with whipped cream. Those were good times. Mike and I also just had these tender moments. I remember one time we were sitting in his room, and he said to me, "Josh, I love you." I said, "Mike, I love you too." Mike got more ill medically and had to eventually move just up a few blocks north from Albany House to a skilled nursing home. We continued our routines, but soon Mike couldn't get around so well. He wasn't as ambulatory, and I brought him food. I'd often meet him on the patio during smoking time, and we continued our routine. Visiting Mike, he called me most every day, but he really began talking much more about philosophy. I had this list of Mike's top 6 favorite things. Let me see if I can find that. Maybe I can just remember what they are. Here they are. No. Anyhow, I'll try. Sports, good food, philosophy, classic rock, and later classical music entirely. And those things, Mike somehow, they were like islands of happiness. It's not easy living with a severe mental illness, but he found these ways to enjoy himself and search for meaning in life. Mike really was on that journey of finding meaning, and we talked a lot about it. And it was just, there was a lot of difficult times, but beautiful times too. Mike, nothing can compare with your parents' unimaginable experiences in the Holocaust. But your adult life, Mike, was one with few open doors and much anguish. I wish your life was easier. But Mike, I did quietly admire your intellectual curiosity, your involvement of finding meaning, even despite the many mental, physical, and societal obstacles you faced. All of us loved it when you were doing okay. You were my good friend. I am enhanced by knowing you, and I wish you peace. I will miss you. Thank you.
We'll hear now from his friend Jim.
Is this okay? I hadn't seen or heard from Mike for decades when from out of the blue his sister Irene emailed me. Mike had fallen, broken his hip, and was sick with COVID. He'd been living on Chicago's North Shore, not in Canada as I'd assumed. Now he was at St. Francis Hospital in critical care, not doing well. Would I like to come see him? I was nervous, but of course I would. We'd go together and see him on January 12th. Late Thursday afternoon, after lunch at Emma's Cafe with Abby and Irene, I saw Mike for the first time in 30 years. He looked different, yet the same. I fought back tears. His once imposing body had diminished, but his spirit was rendered more legible thereby. As I now know, death is not instantaneous. In ambivalence, we practice letting go, peering into the darkness, then recoiling. Or else we're pulled from the brink by glimpses of life's residual attractions in our peripheral vision, whereupon we return to life. Mike had been traversing that borderland. A few times he matter-of-factly declared himself dead. But in the short time I was with him, I saw in his face the full gamut of the vicissitudes of inner life. Anger, bitterness, blame, curiosity, equanimity, fear, forgiveness, gratitude, happiness, hope, and its lack, impatience, levity, loneliness, love, regret, resignation, sadness, tranquility, and wisdom. I saw each and all in the face of the hopeful child become a wise old man, the familiar friend who lay before me. It seemed to me that Mike was dwelling in what the Iroquois Indians called the long body, the self construed as a single transitional being stretched from cradle to grave, sometimes near to the breaking point. In their rituals, costumed Iroquois dancers would wear layered and hinged masks, each bifold persona opening in sequence to reveal a successor. Such rituals would shake viewers out of the comforting conceit of the present and into the knowledge that our being subsumes all that we were and all that we will be. As Irene quoted, to live this way can be fearsome, painful, and even dangerous. I've aspired to live this way for the last 7 years, come what may, so it moved me to see that Mike dared to live likewise, to know that somewhere in this universe I have a kindred spirit. Mike and I were good friends during the 1980s. We'd met in a German class. We both got a kick out of the teacher's retro Hitler mustache. We both liked literature, especially writers like Poe, Kafka, Jorge Luis Borges, and Isaac Bashevis Singer. I've always remembered one poem, a paean to friendship by Scotland's national poet Robert Burns, perhaps addressed to one of his own dying friends. I've known it as roughly as long as I've known Mike. A few of its Scottish words are strange to American ears. A Joe is a dear friend. Brent means smooth, beld means wrinkled, and pow is head. Despite the unfamiliar language, I've never forgot the poem. Here it is in my best Scottish accent. John Anderson, my Joe John, when we were first acquaint, your locks were like the raven, your bonny brow was brent. Well, now your brow is belled, John, your locks are like the snow, but blessings on your frosty pow, John Anderson, my Joe. John Anderson, my Joe John, we clamb the hill together. On many a canty day, John, we had it one another. Now we maun totter down, John, but hand in hand we'll go to sleep together at the foot, John Anderson, my Joe. For many reasons, none of them compelling, our friendship didn't weather the storms of life. And for more years than I can bear to contemplate, we lived our lives apart. It would be convenient to blame the dissolution on Mike's illness, but in truth, it was more my own cowardice and fragility. In consequence, I've often felt alone, as if maybe I never had a true friend. In such dark moments, Burns' poem has sometimes returned to mind. And when it has, I've only ever thought of one person who, because he wasn't perfect, I didn't fully recognize as my lifelong best friend until I saw him in his penultimate guise. After seeing Mike, I left the hospital confused. Confused, sad, but strangely happy. I resolved to return very soon. Over the weekend, I allowed myself to imagine hopeful times to come. Talking on the phone, filling in lost years, visiting Mike and pushing his wheelchair around his neighborhood as his bones mended, looking forward to the day he could get up and walk. I thought back to the old days, to Mike's old home in Glencoe. Mike had a big heart, and he and his parents welcomed me there. I can still visualize the mahogany color and crinkled texture of Mike's mother's signature barbecue beef short ribs, Mike's favorite. When I was lucky enough to stay over there, there were midnight snacks of cheese and onion matzah or fruit compote. On some nights, we'd cross paths in the kitchen with Mike's father, intent on his own insomniac quest for nocturnal tea, potatoes, or cheese. In the morning, there were berry pancakes whipped up by Mike's mother. One morning, Mike was pouring maple syrup and the flow suddenly stopped. Then, to his horror, Mike identified the obstruction and vomited on the table. His mother, who'd survived a concentration camp and had probably seen, if not eaten, her share of vermin, offered comforting perspective. "Oh, Michael, it's just a mouse." I'll always remember their home with its artwork, some made by Mike's father, especially a small painting by a harlequin clown, of a harlequin clown. I remembered the screened porch that looked out onto a backyard crisscrossed by sprawling boughs of white oak trees. It was a sanctuary where Mike and I often sat and talked, or just listened to Bach, Wagner, Strauss, Elgar, Satie, or Ravel. Or when in another frame of mind we played Mike's Rodney Dangerfield LP for the 50th or 100th time, with Rodney, Mike and me doing Rodney jokes in triplicate in our best Rodney voices. "I saw a man jogging naked in front of my house. I said, 'How come?' He said, 'Cause you came home early.'" Mike knew the whole album by heart. I never knew the evening at St. Francis would be our last. It was a blessing, but a painfully mixed one. Painful first because it was undeserved, considering how long I'd abandoned my old friend. Painful too because it reminds me of the lost decades we might have enjoyed had I taken a chance and reached out to Mike somewhere along the line. And painful because of the jarring juxtaposition of death 3 days later. But that our rapprochement transpired at all is a miracle, for which I'll always have Abby, Irene, and Mike to thank. There's so much more I wish I could have said and heard from Mike. Maybe Mike knew that his time was short, for somehow he managed to say what was most important. I'll never forget those words, that face, and that life. Since Mike's passing, it's helped me to know that Mike wasn't alone, that Abby and Irene stayed in touch across the 49th parallel, talking by phone hours a day during COVID. That although Mike never had children of his own, he knew what it was to love and be loved by a child, his nephew Tobin. And that Josh was a fixture and friend for him for so many decades. Most tangible and enduring are the photos of Mike and his family that Irene sent me. I'll always treasure the final hours and the memory of his face as he lay on what became his deathbed. But it's so good to be reminded of who he was in his better days, looking strong and comfortable in that skin and that world. I wish him peace in his new one.
Thank you, Jim. I'd like to ask, are Anthony or Mark here by chance? Anthony.
First off, Jim, that was gorgeous, just beautiful. And I share some of those feelings because it had been 4 decades since Michael, I call him Michael, and I were friends. And I've gone through a lot of those same thoughts over the last few weeks. And I really appreciate your honesty, Jim, about on one hand, you could blame it on his mental illness, but on the other hand, you know, I can't help but question, could I have reached out? So thank you for that. Man, that's a tough one to follow. So my name's Anthony Rowe. I grew up on 206 Fairview in Glencoe, Illinois. And if memory serves, 235 Fairview? I think so, the Lilienheim house. 36. So we were 2 houses away from each other. And I was remarking to Irene and Abby that I believe outside of the Lilienheim family, and Jim, based on your descriptions, maybe I'm behind you, but I feel like I know that house better than just about anybody because I spent so much time there as a kid. And his parents, Henry and Lydia, were just very gracious. I still, to this day, have memories of them having conversations in what sounded like 4 different languages. But it was just a very welcoming home. And that sunroom, spent so much time in that sunroom, watching sports. Just really grateful for those times. When Michael and I were young, Irene asked what we did. We played sports. And then she said, what sports did you play? And the answer was all of them. We played football in the fall. We played basketball year round. We played baseball. We played street hockey on the tennis courts. I think we played tennis. And we just had this group of friends where it was just, if you had four people or more, you could have teams and go off and play. And it was just kind of a remarkable thing. And then when we weren't playing sports outside, we were competing inside. We had these board games, this football board game with a spinner. We had a baseball game called Stratomatic that we played, which was with dice. I think we played chess. I think we played backgammon. So when we weren't outside competing, Michael and I were inside competing. And then when we weren't competing, we were watching sports teams compete. And it just, that's the thing that I just, everything was a competition. And it was crazy and it was fun. And then talking about the Chicago sports teams, we were fans of the Chicago sports teams in the 1970s, and not much was happening back then. And so now, knowing that Michael was able to see the Bears and the Cubs and the Bulls and the Hawks all win championships, I can only imagine how ecstatic that made him, because he lived and died with those teams. And actually, I had moved back to Glencoe from California when I was 10, So in 1975, I was a Golden State Warriors fan, and anyone who has a knowledge of basketball history knows that the Chicago Bulls and the Golden State Warriors met in the Eastern Conference Finals that year. And the Golden State Warriors won, which made me very happy and made Michael very upset because the Bulls were the better team. I would have never admitted that to him, but they were. And yeah, I mean, it was this neighborhood of kids. I had 2 younger brothers, and the Camots lived next door. It was just this group of kids living this dream life. I mean, there really weren't adults supervising us. You know, I sound like that, you know, back in my day thing, but it was true. Like, we were on our own. We were making up our own rules and going along and having a lot of fun. Now, I'm not saying every moment was happy. You know, when you're competing, every moment of every day, you're going to have some disagreements, shall we say? But we always work them out. When I got the email from Josh that said regarding Michael Lilienheim, I told him my world just tilted because Michael was and is a very important part of my life. Those childhood years, they just stay, and they are a foundation, and he was such an important part of my life. And when I went to visit him, you know, much like Jim had mentioned, you know, I hadn't seen him since we were in our early 20s. And now I'm 62, he's 63, and he's very sick. And that's quite an experience, you know, that leap of 40 years. But sitting there next to him, you know, I looked very closely at his face and, you know, looked to see if Michael was there, the Michael that I knew, and he was. I saw it. And it was just wonderful that, you know, we shared memories, and even though we hadn't seen each other in a long time, there was, that friendship was there. And when we shook hands and we left, it was, I just have this sensation that that we were no longer these old men, and that for that moment, we were those 2 kids. And we had a chance to say goodbye and to say thank you. And I'm really grateful for that. And I'm really grateful for everything everyone said here today. I'm really thankful that he had these people in his life. So thank you.
I would like to express my gratitude and appreciation to everybody who spoke today. These were beautiful words. You really shared in a way that honored the whole of Mike's life and your place in it, and helped us all, everybody in this room, no matter what our relationship to him might be, to feel that much closer to him. It's also a mitzvah what you did, because I think people with mental illness are so terribly stigmatized in our society, and to be able to tell his story as his story and not look away, which is too often what we do with people who are mentally ill, to honor who he was as a child, to honor who he was as an adult. This is the all of his story. And I think that is truly a gift. What's a deeper gift, I think, is the love that he knew in his life. And whatever sorrow we might feel about his struggles, which were significant, there's no question. This kind of mental illness is horrible, and it is a struggle to live with it. But knowing, first of all, that he had so much love along the way to support him through his amazing parents, his sister, his brother-in-law, so many friends, his social worker who was much more than a social worker. It is should be comfort knowing that he felt so much love during the course of his life. The other thing that I think stood out so clearly from every single person who spoke, from Irene on, was that he was a man of great strength and courage. And that's another thing I think we too often do when we stigmatize people who live with mental illness, is we don't realize how much courage and how much resilience and how much stamina it takes to get up every day and battle this illness. And this is something Irene said to me 2 days ago. She has no doubt that this courage and stamina was something that was bequeathed to him by her parents, who also had to get up every day and live with just unimaginable odds and make it through. And like them, Mike made it through too, thanks to people in this room and so many others who were part of his life. So I think that is our imperative going forward, to make sure that everybody in our life knows that they are supported and loved, and that their stories are honored, and that we will be there for them no matter what. And if we can continue to do that, his life will always continue to be a blessing, and his memory will be so as well. Let's rise now for the chanting of El Malei Rachamim, which is the memorial prayer. El Malei Rachamim, shochen bamromim, hamitzei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina, b'malot kedoshim utehorim, kezohar harakia mazirim, et nishmat Michael ben Chaim v'Golde, shalach le'olamo. Ana balarachamim, astirehu beseter kanafecha leolamim, utzror bitzror achayim et nishmato. Adonai hu nachalato, ve'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar Amen. O God, filled with compassion, whose loving presence ever surrounds us, bring final rest to the soul of Michael Lilienheim, who has returned to his source. May the memory of his life shine forth like the brilliance of the skies above, as it brightens our own lives even now. May you, who are the source of all compassion, shelter him beneath the protection of your wings and bind his soul among the living, that he may rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.
Friends, this concludes the services here at the chapel. The interment and burial service will continue from here at Memorial Park Cemetery. For those of you traveling with us in the funeral procession, please make sure that your bright headlights and your 4A flashers are on. We'll provide you with an orange safety sticker or a magnetic orange flag to be placed on top of your car. Please travel as close as safety permits to the car in front of you to avoid any gaps in our procession. The family will be together at the Mark residence at 4155 Grant Street in Skokie for Shiva, following the burial with a minyan service this evening at 7 p.m., and that any memorial contributions be made to the National Alliance on Mental Illness. That information is available in the service folder, and for those of you joining us online, that information is also available on our website. At this time, I would ask everyone to remain standing as we escort the casket and the rabbi from the chapel. Again, for those of you going to the cemetery, we do ask that you go immediately and directly to your cars. Due to cemetery scheduling, we do need to be there just as quickly as possible. Thank you so much.